Before we get into this, I want to give a shout out to J Reviews and FC Playthroughs, as the footage provided here was from them, so go check out their channels. But without further ado, on to the video. Sonic the Hedgehog 4, the sequel 16 years in the making. Except, not really. Sonic the Hedgehog 4 is not Sonic the Hedgehog 4, and it was just called that to sell units, and it worked. However, originally the game was called Sonic the Portable and was meant to release on just phones, which explains why the game is so short and so cheap. But we'll get into that in a little bit. But this was Sega's attempt to get into the mobile game craze, since games like Cut the Rope and Angry Birds were selling like hotcakes, and as I'm sure you all know, Sega is not against making money, and it was more than likely will rush out products if it means making money, even if those products are clearly not ready, with examples on screen being shown. However, sometime out of the blue, Sega decided that the game needed to be renamed Sonic 4 and go multi-platform and released on both PCs and home consoles, instead of just phones, which was the original intention. Now I can think of a few reasons on why Sega did this, but I think the three biggest reasons are the following. A. At the time, Sonic's reputation was at an all-time low, since this game was being developed in the mid to late 2000s, when Sonic's reputation was all but destroyed, thanks to games like Sonic 06 and Sonic and the Secret Rings. And both fans and critics wanted games to go back to how they were on the Genesis, instead of all the interesting stuff Sonic Team was doing with Sonic in the 2000s. B. Calling the game Sonic 4 push units, considering the fact that Sonic 3 and Knuckles is one of Sonic's best games in the entire franchise, so giving fans and critics a number release would make a ton of money, and like I said, it worked perfectly. Alongside this, the final reason is that if they just released the next number release on mobile and not on home consoles, fans would have gotten pissed. So if they were going to call the game Sonic 4, they were going to have to release it on consoles and PCs. But that created a problem. Keep in mind, this was originally a game made just for mobile, meaning it was short, but since it was releasing on consoles, they needed to do something to explain why the game was so short. Either that or add money to the project to make more levels, and knowing Sega, they wouldn't do that. And their solution to that problem, however, was calling the game Sonic 4 Episode 1. This way we can hide the fact that A, this game is a bigger project when it didn't need to become a bigger project, and B, we can also make future episodes and make more money. They only ever released 2 episodes of Sonic 4. But either way, this was their solution. In 2009, we got our first teaser of a teaser, and man, do studios love doing that even to this day. But in 2010, the first full trailer was released, and people were excited for it, alongside this and Sonic Colors, which were released the same year. But not Sonic Freeriders, because this game sucks. Seriously, don't play it, it sucks. But anyway, like I said, people were excited for it. Until that is, a prototype was leaked on the Xbox 360 and the community lost their. The main issue that people had with the demo was Sonic's physics, one of the most important parts about the character, especially in 2D. The physics here sucked. Now before we go ahead and continue this, I just want to mention that both Sonic 4 Episode 1 and Sonic 4 Episode 2 were both developed by DIMS, the same company that were responsible for the Sonic Advance trilogy and the Sonic Rush games, which in my opinion are some amazing games, with Sonic Rush being one of my favorite games of all time. But the fact that they were able to make some incredible 2D Sonic games on the Game Boy Advance and DS, yet couldn't get the physics right for Sonic 4 Episode 1 was concerning, to say the least. Now, it was pretty obvious that Sonic 4 was seemingly using Sonic Rush's engine, considering the fact that Sonic controlled how he controls in Sonic Rush without boosting, which doesn't control that well, which honestly just makes me question more why they chose to make the game with Sonic Rush's engine and not a version of Sonic Advance's engine. As DIMS showed, they were capable of making a pretty good replication of Sonic's controls on the Genesis, but the fact they went with Rush's engine instead of Advance's engine, in my opinion, was a mistake. And what also didn't help matters was the fact that certain levels, specifically Lost Labyrinth and Casino Night, had some bad gimmicks in them, while also having certain power-ups removed, most notably elemental shields, and they were not brought back for Episode 2 either. And finally, only having Sonic playable in the game, with Tails and Knuckles being nowhere in sight, especially not playable, despite the fact that this was apparently meant to be a sequel to 3 and Knuckles, and its supposed sequel only had Sonic as a playable character. So now more than ever, Sonic 4 Episode 1 must look like a cash grab, and it was. Now, to be fair to Sega, they did delay the game to fix certain issues. Keyword being certain. Those being the gimmicks, but aside from that, nothing was really changed, as the physics still suck, Tails and Knuckles are still absent, and power-ups and shields are back how they were in Sonic 1, proving this game was never meant to be a sequel to Sonic 3 and Knuckles. Regardless, the game released on October 7, 2010, and was a success both financially and critically, but within the Sonic fanbase, it's divisive title, and I think that this is one of the worst Sonic games ever made. Cat's out of the bag. The reason I don't like this game and find the Sonic 4 title as a joke is for a couple reasons. The first reason being the zones. All the zones in this game are just variations of Green Hill, Casino Night, Labyrinth Zone, and Metropolis, with all the bosses being from their respective zones, minus the boss fight in Lost Labyrinth, since Labyrinth didn't have a proper boss fight. But I guarantee you if there was a proper boss fight, they would reuse it. And although for the boss fight in Mad Gear Zone there is a phase 2, it's still not that hard to beat. And also, fun fact, the original title, Sonic the Portable, appears in the background of Casino Street, despite the fact the game is now called Sonic 4 Episode 1. They really couldn't be bothered to change that, which in my opinion speaks volumes on how much the team cared about this game. Another reason I don't like this game is because of how it looks. I personally think this game doesn't look that good, and in my personal opinion, the game should have had a 16-bit art style. Let's keep in mind, this was released in 2010, around the time the NES's biggest games were turning 20 years old. Alongside this, the Sonic franchise next year turned 20 years old, and certain 2D games because of this were made to look and play like their previous NES installments, with Mega Man 9 leading the charge. And had Sonic 4 gone with the 16-bit art style, I personally think it would have looked pretty good and a lot better. But instead, we get this cheap plastic art style, and what doesn't help is Sonic's physics, and is the main reason why I don't like this game and hate it, as the game's physics suck. Like, look at this!
So, okay, running and slowing down, and I made it. What the crap?
And since Sonic's physics are their dog shit in this game, they put dash pads and springs all over the arena to help you gain speed, because even the developers knew Sonic controlled like utter ass in this game. But they used those to pull off some cheap deaths. For example, throwing you into spikes you couldn't see coming, throwing you into pits you also couldn't see coming, and the one that happens a lot, at least it did for me, throwing you into pits you also couldn't see coming. Seriously? Now keep in mind, this game was developed by Dimps, like I said earlier, who has a pretty negative reputation amongst the Sonic community, considering the fact they're well known for finding ways to get some cheap deaths on you, most notably through the two ways I spoke of earlier. Falling into enemies you couldn't see coming, and being thrown into pits you couldn't see coming. And Sonic 4 Episode 1 has a healthy dose of that. What also doesn't help is the fact that Sonic controls terribly, since on the ground, he controls the same way he does in Sonic Rush when you are boosting, like I said earlier, but it's much, much worse. And when he's in the air, he drops like a fucking rock, and overall, Sonic's control is just awkward and terrible, making it not fun to play as him. And what doesn't help is the fact that not only is every zone in this game just a variation of a previous zone from past games, they're also really lame and boring, probably some of the worst Sonic levels I've ever played. Just for using stuff from original levels to try to grab as much nostalgia as possible. And to add further insult to injury, the music in this game, in my opinion, is nothing special, mediocre at best. None of this game's music is memorable to me, aside from Splash Hill, which I think is pretty solid. But aside from that, I usually forget the music of the previous zones when I move on to the next zone. Heck, I can't even talk about the story of this game, because this game has no story as far as I can tell. And if there is a story, its plot is somehow worse than Sonic Generations' plot, and its plot was easily the worst part of Generations. From what I can tell, the plot is Eggman is pissed at Sonic for always beating him and will now fight Sonic to beat him. That's as far as I can tell what the plot of this game is. And if this isn't the plot of the game, or if it's not something similar to this, then there's probably no plot. But we're not done with this game yet, as you saw special stages, the final battle, and Super Sonic to talk about. Now for the special stages, they're actually pretty solid, and it's the best part of this game. It's the Sonic 1 special stages, why am I not surprised, but rather than controlling Sonic navigating through the special stage, you instead control the special stage and guide Sonic through it, rather than controlling Sonic, which in my opinion is much better than what Sonic 1 did, is the only edge this game has to the Genesis games, specifically Sonic 1. Because when you compare Sonic 4 Episode 1 to Sonic 1 to see which has the most content, Sonic 1 somehow manages to win out in terms of content, as it has 6 zones with 3 acts per each, giving it a total of 18 levels, while Sonic 4 Episode 1 has 4 zones with 3 acts each, with a total of 12 levels. The fact that this 2010 game can't rival Sonic 1, which was released in 1991 in total content, is both embarrassing and hilarious. And if we're just a mobile game like it was originally intended, then I get why it's so short. But when you put it on home consoles and make it a numbered entry, people are going to compare it to the Genesis games, and that's what they did. If you think it's bad just comparing Sonic 4 Episode 1 to Sonic 1, It gets worse when you compare Sonic 4 to Sonic 3 and Knuckles, which is a total of 24 levels, super and hyper forms for all 3 of its playable characters respectively, plus a bunch of other content. So level-wise, it is double the content of its supposed sequel. Power-up-wise, it has the elemental shields in it. It has double the content of its supposed sequel, and each character gets at least 1 form, 2 for Sonic when you collect all 7 of the Chaos Emeralds and Super Emeralds. But speaking of super forms, that's a great segue to talk about Super Sonic. Similarly to the Genesis games, after collecting all 7 of the Chaos Emeralds in the special stages, you unlock Super Sonic and are able to use them in levels, who, to the game's credit, is still fun to use on the ground. However, I think it's only fun to use on the ground because, unlike regular Sonic, Super Sonic's actually fast and doesn't need speed boosts and springs to go fast. But he's still awkward and terrible to control in the air, so you'll probably fall into pits since it's still awkward and terrible to play as him. But now into the last thing of this game, that being the final level, which is a boss rush because of course it's a boss rush. The game is now recycling itself. If that doesn't say how much the team cared about this game, then I don't know what does. But after the boss rush, you get the true final boss, with it being a variation of the Sonic 2 final boss fight. I'm not even surprised at this point. The game is now recycling more stuff from past games because it's the major theme of Sonic 4 Episode 1 as we've gone over. Trying to grab onto as much nostalgia as possible and trying to pretend like Sonic 06 never happened. Ugh. Not only is this a variation of the Sonic 2 final boss fight, it's actually easier than the original boss since you're allowed to have rings on you during the fight, which reduces the challenge a lot. But what annoys me the most is the fact that once you get the last hit, you have 6 seconds to fully finish him off. But if you fail, then you automatically die and have to do the boss fight all over again. Screw that. But when you do beat it, you get the Sonic 1 ending again. If you get all the rings, you get the ending, but with Super Sonic. Woohoo! And then after that, the game ends and you give a cliffhanger that shows Metal Sonic, which leads into Sonic 4 Episode 2. And thank goodness I no longer have to talk about this game. Because after going over it and playing this game around 2 to 3 times for this video, I personally think this is one of the worst Sonic games I've ever played. And is one of the worst Sonic games of all time. Now, if you like Sonic 4 Episode 1, that's your opinion, and you should continue playing games you like. Don't let my opinion influence yours. But to me, all I see is a game that is so hell-bent on grabbing as much nostalgia as possible that it has nothing to call its own and doesn't try anything risky to make you wowed simply because Sega was so obsessed with pushing 06 away and pretending like it never happened, which they themselves caused the situation to happen in the first place, so then they rushed the game out the door for a holiday release in Sonic's 50th anniversary. And majority of the stuff in Sonic 4 Episode 1 that it does bring back feels terrible to control and is much worse than how they were in the original game. But like I said, that's my opinion. Leave your thoughts in the comment section down below of what you all think of Sonic 4 Episode 1. Make sure you guys go ahead, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and tune in next week as we'll be talking about the sequel to 4 Episode 1, Sonic 4 Episode 2. But now that the video's over, thank God I no longer get to play Sonic 4 Episode 1 again. And now I'm just going to go uninstall it. Yeah, that sounds like fun.